"Son, I now feel faint, and today I quit my job," the old father said, his voice trembling as he stood in the doorway of his son's lavish home. At 70 years old, his hands were worn from decades of labor, his back bent from years of carrying the weight of his family's survival. He had spent his entire life working day and night, sacrificing his own needs to ensure his children never went hungry, never lacked for anything. But now, as he stood before his eldest son, Robert, he felt the weight of his age pressing down on him, a heaviness that told him he could no longer carry on. Robert, a tall man in his late 40s with a sharp jawline and a well-paying job, froze mid-step as he heard his father's words. His face twisted with disbelief, and before the father could finish explaining, Robert's voice cut through the air like a blade. "What did you say? You quit your job?" His tone was laced with anger, his eyes narrowing as he stared at his father. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You know the inflation we're dealing with. Me and Sarah were both working hard, day in, day out, just to meet our expenses. She's a manager at the bank, and I'm breaking my back at my job. And now you come here and tell me you quit? How are we supposed to feed you now? You can't just quit your job like that. Go back to your employer, take back your resignation, and start working again. We can't afford to take care of you." The father stood there, stunned, his heart sinking into his chest. He had been about to tell Robert the rest of the story, that his employer, after decades of loyal service, had rewarded him with $8 million for his dedication. It was a sum that would change their lives, a sum that the father had planned to share with his sons. But Robert's harsh words stopped him cold. The father's lips parted, but no words came out. The sting of his son's rejection burned deeper than any hunger he had ever felt in his life. He thought of all the years he had spent toiling for his family, the nights he had gone to bed with an empty stomach so Robert could have enough to eat, the days he had worked through sickness and exhaustion to pay for Robert's education. He had given everything to this boy, now a man, who stood before him with nothing but contempt. The father's silence seemed to fuel Robert's anger even more. "What are you standing there for? Did you hear me? We can't feed you. You need to go back to work," Robert shouted, his voice echoing through the house. The father's heart shattered, but he said nothing. He turned away, his shoulders slumped, and retreated to the small room at the back of the house where he had been staying since he moved in with Robert and his wife, Sarah, a few months ago. As the father sat on the edge of his bed that night, his mind raced with memories of the past. He remembered the early days after his wife had passed away, leaving him alone to raise Robert and his younger brother, Jim. The father had been a laborer, working long hours at a factory, his hands calloused from lifting heavy machinery, his body aching from the relentless grind. There were days when he had nothing to eat, but he always made sure his sons had food on the table. He would come home late at night, his stomach growling, and watch as Robert and Jim ate their meals, their faces lighting up with the joy of a full belly. He had gone without so they could have more. More food, more opportunities, more chances at a better life. He had worked tirelessly to send Robert to high school, scrimping and saving every penny to pay for his books and uniforms. Robert had been a bright student, and the father had dreamed of the day his son would grow up to be a successful man, someone who would take care of him in his old age, just as he had taken care of them. But now, at 70 years old, after a lifetime of sacrifice, the father found himself facing the bitter reality of his son's ingratitude. As he sat lost in thought, the sound of shouting jolted him back to the present. The voices were coming from the living room, Robert and Sarah, arguing loudly. The father's heart pounded as he stepped out of his room and moved closer to the door, listening carefully. "He can't stay here, Sarah," Robert's voice boomed. "We can't afford to take care of him. He quit his job without even thinking about how it would affect us. What are we supposed to do now? We're already struggling to keep up with our expenses, and now we have another mouth to feed." Sarah's voice was just as harsh. "I told you we shouldn't have let him move in with us in the first place. We have our own lives to live, Robert. We can't be burdened with an old man who can't even take care of himself. He needs to leave. Tomorrow morning we tell him to go." The father's heart felt as though it were being torn apart. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His own son and daughter-in-law, the people he had sacrificed everything for, were speaking of him as if he were nothing more than a burden. He thought of the countless nights he had stayed up late, mending their clothes so they could look presentable at school, the mornings he had woken up early to pack their lunches, the years he had spent building a future for them. And now they were ready to cast him aside without a second thought. He returned to his room, his hands shaking as he began to pack his belongings into an old tattered bag. He didn't need to be told to leave. He already knew he wasn't wanted. As he folded his few possessions, the door to his room burst open, and Robert and Sarah stormed in. Their faces were flushed with anger, their eyes cold and unyielding. "We were just coming to tell you to leave," Robert said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You can't stay here anymore. You need to go. Now." The father didn't argue. He simply nodded, his heart heavy with sorrow, and picked up his bag. As he walked out of the house, memories flooded his mind once more. He remembered how he had single-handedly fed his entire family, working long hours at the factory while his sons were young. He had been the sole breadwinner, the one who had kept them afloat through every hardship. He had never asked for anything in return, only hoping that his sons would grow up to be kind, compassionate men. But now, as he stepped out into the cold night air, he realized how wrong he had been. With nowhere else to go, the father decided to seek out his younger son, Jim. Jim had always been the softer of the two boys, the one who seemed to understand the sacrifices their father had made. A few months ago, Jim had visited the father and insisted he come live with him and his wife, Elena. "Dad, come to my home," Jim had said, his voice warm and sincere. "Leave that job. We'll take care of you. You don't need to work anymore." At the time, the father had brushed off the offer, determined to keep working as long as he could. But now, with Robert's rejection still burning in his chest, he decided to take Jim up on his offer. The journey to Jim's house was long and exhausting, but the father pressed on, his heart clinging to the hope that Jim would be different. When he finally arrived, Jim and Elena welcomed him with open arms, their smiles warm and inviting. "Dad, you're here!" Jim exclaimed, pulling his father into a tight hug. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming? Come in, come in!" Elena, a kind-looking woman with a gentle demeanor, prepared a hearty dinner, and for the first time in days, the father felt a glimmer of hope. As they sat down to eat, the father decided to share his news. "Jim, Elena," he began, his voice soft but steady. "I quit my job today. I couldn't work anymore. I'm too old, too tired. So I've come to live with you, just as you offered." The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Jim's face, which had been warm and welcoming just moments ago, grew pale. Elena's smile vanished, replaced by a look of unease. The father noticed the change immediately, and his heart sank once more. He had seen that look before, on Robert's face, just hours earlier. The rest of the dinner passed in tense silence, and the father knew what was coming. The next morning, Jim and Elena approached him as he sat in the small guest room they had given him. "Dad," Jim said, his voice cold and distant, "we've talked about it and we can't have you staying here. We thought you were still working, that you'd be able to support yourself. But if you've quit your job, we can't take care of you. You need to leave." The father felt as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. He had held on to the hope that Jim, his younger son, would be different, that he would honor the sacrifices his father had made. But now, as he stood there, facing rejection for the second time in as many days, he realized that both of his sons had turned their backs on him. He packed his bag once more, his hands trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow, and left Jim's house without another word. As he walked down the street, the father's mind churned with thoughts of betrayal. He had given everything to his sons, his time, his energy, his health, his very life. And yet, they had cast him aside the moment he could no longer work. He thought of the $8 million that sat in his bank account, a reward for his decades of loyalty to his employer. He had planned to share it with his sons, to give them a better life, just as he had always done. But now, seeing their true colors, he decided that they didn't deserve to know about the money, not yet. The father's heart hardened as he walked, a new resolve forming in his mind. He would teach his sons a lesson, one they would remember for the rest of their lives. He would show them the consequences of their ingratitude, the pain of abandoning the man who had given them everything. He found a small, modest apartment to rent with a portion of his savings, and there he began to plan. Weeks turned into months, and the father lived quietly on his own, watching from a distance as his sons went about their lives. He heard through mutual acquaintances that Robert and Sarah were struggling financially, their expenses mounting as inflation continued to rise. Jim and Elena, too, were facing difficulties, their once comfortable lifestyle strained by unexpected setbacks. The father knew that the time was coming when his sons would realize the gravity of what they had done. One day, the father received a call from Robert. His voice was shaky, filled with desperation. "Dad, I need to see you," Robert said. "Please, can we meet? I need to talk to you." The father agreed, and a few days later, Jim reached out as well, his tone equally pleading. The father arranged for both of his sons to meet him at his small apartment, knowing that the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. When Robert and Jim arrived, the father could see the toll that the past months had taken on them. Their faces were drawn, their eyes red from sleepless nights. They sat across from him, their heads bowed in shame, and the father waited silently for them to speak. "Dad," Robert began, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me that day. I was so caught up in my own problems, my own stress, that I didn't think about everything you've done for us. I shouldn't have told you to leave. I shouldn't have treated you like that. You've always been there for me, and I failed you. Please, forgive me." Jim nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry too, Dad," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I let you down. You came to me for help and I turned you away. I was so focused on my own life that I forgot everything you sacrificed for us. You gave us everything, and we gave you nothing in return. Please, Dad, forgive us." The father watched his sons, his heart softening as he saw the genuine remorse in their eyes. He had wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, to understand the pain they had caused him, and now, as they sat before him, crying and begging for forgiveness, he knew that they had learned their lesson. "My sons," the father said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I spent my entire life working for you. I went hungry so you could eat. I worked through sickness and exhaustion so you could have an education, a better life. I gave you everything I had, and when I needed you most, you turned me away, but I forgive you. I forgive you because I love you and I always will." Robert and Jim sobbed harder, their shoulders shaking as they reached out to embrace their father. The father held them close, his own tears falling as he felt the weight of their reconciliation. And then he spoke again, his voice soft but firm. "There's something you don't know," he said. "The day I told you I quit my job, I didn't tell you the whole story. My employer, after all those years of service, gave me $8 million as a reward for my dedication. I had planned to share it with you, to give you a better life, but when I saw how you treated me, I decided to keep it a secret. Now, seeing that you've truly changed, I want you to know that this money is yours. Both of you. It's for you, my sons." The room fell silent for a moment, and then Robert and Jim burst into tears once more, their cries filled with a mix of joy, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. They hugged their father tightly, their apologies spilling out between sobs as they realized the depth of his love for them. The father held his sons close, his heart finally at peace, knowing that they had learned the value of family, the importance of gratitude, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his children.